All right, thank you for coming in on a Saturday. We really appreciate it. It's such a beautiful day, so thank you for spending some time inside with us. So today we'll be talking about Johns Pass Village Activity Center. We'll be talking about the zoning with the Activity Center. So that's really what we're focusing today on this workshop. So a little background of the Activity Center and why we created the Activity Center, why the application is going forward. It's really to protect the unique character of the village, to assure that we have compatible redevelopment. We must be consistent with the countywide plan, and this is really a proactive instead of reactive approach in planning. A little bit of the relationship here with local land regulations. There are three things to keep in mind while we go through this presentation. We have Fort Pinellas. You can see that at the top of this graphic. Fort Pinellas has a countywide plan, and in that plan they have rules, strategies, and then they have a corresponding map. Now through that, we really have, with each land category, it's pretty broad and basic: intensity, density, uses, and ISRs. And then locally, we have two different plans. We have the comprehensive plan, and we have the code of ordinances. All three of these things have to be consistent throughout all plans. So the comprehensive plan looks very similar to the countywide plan when we're looking at land use. It's quite broad: intensities, densities, uses, impervious surface ratios. It's really where you see the nitty-gritty of planning and say what you can do with your land is really in the code of ordinances, looking at the land development regulations, and within the land development regulations, that's where we have our zoning districts. So in zoning, you see setbacks, your heights, and things of that nature. And then we also have a corresponding zoning map. So we're focusing more on the code of ordinances with that land development regulations and the zoning today. Here are all three maps. So you can see the countywide plan map and the future land use map through our comprehensive plan. They look very similar. And then in the top right corner is that zoning map. Looks a little different, but those are all of our zoning districts, and that's what we're focusing on through this workshop. So before this application, you can kind of see what the countywide plan, future land use, corresponding with our comprehensive plan, future land use, and how they're a little different. So like I stated before, we have to be in concert with the countywide plan. So the countywide plan, they can have for certain land uses, say with the retail and services, a floor area ratio of 0.55. Locally, we can adopt something at like that 0.55 floor area ratio, but we cannot exceed that standard. And so you can see on the right how some of our standards exceeded what the county allowed for. And that's what's highlighted in yellow. So the Johns Pass Village Activity Center is really in this whole area that's highlighted on the map. Now, as we all know here, things on 133rd looks very different than things on Boardwalk, which looks different than things on Pelican. So we understand that within this area, there's a lot of variations in development. And that's why we created these 6 different character districts, as you can see on the screen. Now, these 6 different character districts will then turn into new zoning districts. And each zoning district will have their own standards. So each zoning district will have their own height, their own setbacks, things of that nature. So the countywide plan map, through the application for the activity center, this is what that would look like. Existing, and then the proposed on the right. Same to the comprehensive plan. That's one of our local plans. As you can see, it's just a broad activity center on the right side. Now, in the comprehensive plan, it does state all those 6 character districts, and then it has different intensities and densities in this special area plan. So the comprehensive plan refers to this document. It's a large document, 70-page document, saying this is where you get your intensities and densities. You have to look at this document. That document has all of these 6 character districts with different intensities and densities. So although it looks like one type of land, it actually has those 6 different character districts within the comprehensive plan. And then going further in the land development regulations in the corresponding zoning map, this is where you see the 6 different new zoning districts. You can kind of see here, these are the proposed standards for the activity center and how each one of these districts has different intensities and densities based on the area. So looking into the Code of Ordinances locally. So when you come in and you ask, well, what can I do with my land? Typically, we're looking at the land development regulations. Code of Ordinance has a lot of different things in there. Land development regulations have things like landscaping, driveways, sidewalks, accessory structures, parking standards, swimming pools. They also have zoning districts. The zoning districts is within that land development regulations. And then in your zoning districts, each district has setback, height, also states the impervious surface ratio, and then there's also a section that some of these zoning districts have special requirements. Some of those special requirements are buffering requirements. That's typically what we see in that section. So that is use and zone specific. So sometimes in one of the zoning categories, it'll say if you have a multifamily development and you're next to a single family development, you have to put an extra buffer of landscape. So those are kind of the buffering requirements that I'm talking about. And there's also something that we can input that we are wanting to input with these new zoning districts are design standards. So we're not allowed to have design standards for single family and duplexes, but some things of the design standards would be architectural features. So if you are thinking about these 6 new zoning districts, we're really looking at those architectural features and design details really in the traditional village, this yellow area, the commercial core, this orange area, and then this pink area, which is boardwalk. The areas that you typically think of Johns Pass Village and the tourist commercial areas. So an example of the land development regulations, specifically looking at zoning districts. So C1 zoning, I'll show you on the map where that is. C1 zoning is this lighter pink area. It's really all of Johns Pass Village, that tourist area. So this is what's in our code right now. So for C1 zoning, the setbacks are for front yard, none. So we have an example here. So there's no setback on the front. On the side yard, it's 10 feet on one side. So we included a 10-foot side setback. And rear yard is 25 feet, which we have right here. The height, the max height is 34 feet. And in our Code of Ordinances, we measure the height from, it's called base flood elevation plus freeboard, which is called design flood elevation. Might be hard to grasp. So the easiest way to think of this is the second floor, where the second floor begins. That's where we really begin measuring that height. So 34 feet, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but from here, from that second story. And then the floor area ratio, which is the ratio of the lot to the building. And when we're measuring floor area ratio, it's easier to imagine it as like air-conditioned area. Our definition goes into more detail on that, but just as something to imagine, a little easier to grasp, it's like air-conditioned area, so things that are enclosed. So this is typically what our, oh, yes. Test.
Required.
This is,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know we were
It's
being
okay.
recorded.
I can answer and try and go over that. So these diagrams on the right, that shows what could be, that's our current standards and what could currently be built with our current standards.
But is that what's there?
That's not what's there. So, I mean, what's there is in these pictures.
So are there any setbacks on what's there?
Right now, as you can see, just taking this as an example, this is from the property appraiser's website. Most of these buildings in Village have no setbacks in the front. Most of them are right next to each other.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify because it may not be clear. That's not
Okay.
what they look like now in that diagram, right?
That's
what
correct,
they would
yeah.
have to look like
Yes,
if
thank
they
you.
rebuilt it. Is that correct?
That is totally correct.
So basically, where they are now is where the gray, kind of where the gray is.
Yes, that
Takes
block
up the
right
whole
here.
space. So you're suggesting that if it went away, it would be much smaller.
It would be much smaller.
Okay,
And
I
it
just-
would not have that Main Street quality, which is really what
Right.
you.
I mean, that was unclear
what's
to me at
important.
first, so I thought if somebody
Okay.
was hearing this for the first time, they might want to, I wanted to clarify that. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard for us to see in other areas of planning. You know, we see it all the time. So yes, you are absolutely correct. As what we have there today is more of what you think of a typical traditional Main Street, very walkable, stores right next to each other. Well, our zoning districts and land development regulations do not support that. The required setbacks are what's showing in this diagram. So, and that's what's important, the Main Street quality. So it's another factor in this whole Johns Pass Village Activity Center is really looking at the development down there, what's important, and retaining what's there, and then making sure that any new development matches those standards. It matches that character. So taking another zoning district, we're going to look at the R3 zoning district and do similar things. So R3 is really what you have up and down Gulf Boulevard on the west side. There is a little piece of land on Pelican that is also R3, but it's typically up and down Gulf Boulevard on the west side. So R3 zoning district. The front yard is 20 feet. Let's see. It's a little hard for me to see. So 20 feet right here. We're going to take the smaller lot first. Is a single family home. So how it says 20 to 25 feet, that is, I believe that one is based on use. So if you're a single family home, it's 20 feet. If you're multifamily or temporary lodging, 25 feet, where that variation it'll either be because of use or the size of the lot or width of the lot. So front yard, it's 20 feet on this example. Side yard, 5 to 10 feet. So since this is a single family home, it's 5 feet. So we have 5 feet on this side, 5 feet on the other side. And then the rear yard, this is either the CCCL if you're on the beach or 25 feet. So here we have 25 feet. So this is typically what you're going to see for a single family home given the zoning district standards. And then we're going to take, oh, yes. Oh, Mike. Wait, be patient.
I'm sure that people hearing it for the
Yeah,
first
you
time.
can stop me whenever.
Because I remember how
It's totally
confused
fine.
I was at first, right? So the diagram on the right, all right, does not
Yes.
necessarily indicate what the houses all look like. Do you have a sense of what percentage of the houses there actually conform already to these, or what percentage are not in, they don't align with that?
So we do have, and we don't have it in this presentation, but we've shown it in other presentations. Andrew's done a really great job at going through each property and looking at the intensities and densities and seeing what's conforming and what is not conforming. So we call what's not conforming that was built before the land development regulations, before all these rules and regulations were put in place, we call that legally non-conforming. So another reason why Johns Pass Village encompasses that whole area, there's a lot of legally non-conforming and non-conforming properties, intensities and densities, but that's really where they're concentrated.
Do you have a sense for what year that happened? Like I know my house was built in 89 and 85. They had to be 2 stories after that point. So when did these regulations?
I know a lot
come
of
in?
our zoning codes was 1983, right? Yeah, 1983.
Maybe anything built before 1983
It's
may not
probably
conform.
going to be-
Probably doesn't conform.
Yeah.
And if they had to rebuild, they'd
It would
have
be
to
quite
conform.
different. Now, we do have a section in our code that allows for, it talks about legally non-conforming properties, properties that were built before the code. And there's some allowances for commercial properties. They're not as lenient as for residential properties. So it doesn't mention that you can get to the same floor area ratio. And that's one of the issues that we have down in Johns Pass Village, especially in this, what you think of the traditional Johns Pass Village area. Those floor area ratios are a lot higher than what the county allows for, which is why we have to go for a different land use category.
Thanks. I just wanted clarification because I think most people think of this whole designation as just the village. We're talking about across the street as well, and that's gonna
Yes.
have an impact on that side. In most cases, for the better, but
Yes, yes. And like I stated before, the reason why this whole area was, there's a few different reasons why, but one of the main reasons is there's a concentration of those non-conforming properties in this area. There's also issues that we've found with the land use and how the county has categorized it, especially like in this transitional district. So this transitional district is very similar to what's right next to it. We imagine these zoning standards to be almost identical. These property owners will see little to no differences. To be honest, a lot of it is making sure that the county's land use is corrected.
thanks. I'll try not to interrupt.
It's totally fine. So let's see, we're going with this other example of R3 zoning. So very similar to what we did up there. The front yard, Marcy, I can't see that. Is that 25? I think it's 25. And then 44 is the height here, how we're measuring it from the second floor. That's a design flood elevation. So from the second floor up, that's 44 feet. And then the floor area ratio is only for commercial use. So that just kind of gives you an example of what we're looking for in zoning, what zoning does. You don't have the setbacks, the height, the nitty-gritty things of planning. And when you walk into City Hall, oh, what can I do with my property? Can I put an addition on? Can I go an extra floor? Can I put an accessory structure in the back? Those are all in the zoning and the land development regulations, and that's what we really want your input on at these meetings. So with planning and urban design principles, in the comprehensive plan, it does talk about the special character and unique design features of Johns Pass Village, so that really supports the city's decision on going forward with the activity center. And we also want to bring that forward in our zoning districts as well. So just like I was talking about having those design standards and architectural details in those specific zones. And then the countywide strategies plan requires certain design principles to be addressed in that special area plan. So The special area plan is with the activity center. So since this is an activity center, we really need to focus on location, size, and density and intensity standards, the connectivity, site orientation, public realm enhancements, ground floor design and use, and the transition to neighborhoods. So when you go through each station, I want you to think about these things. It doesn't have to be specific to zoning, but we also want to see, we have SWOT analysis. So what you think a strength is of certain districts, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, kind of keeping this slide and these things in mind while you go through that. And so where we are in this whole process with the activity center and the zoning, so currently we are at this number 3. So we're at amending the countywide plan to establish that activity center on the countywide plan. So this will go to the county's meeting on February the 20th, and everyone's welcome to attend. And then after that is done, it'll come back locally to the BOC for their final action on the activity center plan, on our local comprehensive plan. And that is scheduled for March 13. You're obviously welcome to attend that. And then what we're doing today, so with the activity center land use, we must amend our land development code to establish those zoning districts. So today we are talking about those zoning districts, the proposed setbacks, and any input that we have from everyone here. And this is the 3rd workshop for the activity center zoning. All 3 meetings were exactly the same presentation, the same handout, and then we have the stations in front of us. So we will take questions and answers, but I would also say after that, please get up, walk to every station. You can see where each character district is, each new zoning district is. Look at the SWOT analysis and put down anything that comes to your mind. Any answers are good answers, so we want as much input as possible. And then there's also a sheet that was at the front of the room. Please fill that out. If you want to take it home and turn it in later, feel free to do that. You can turn it into City Hall, or you can email it to us.
Can you clarify internal versus external?
I don't think that there's too much of a difference between internal and external. It's really looking at the harmful and helpful.
Oh, I mean, what's the boundary between internal, external why did you must have put it there for some reason?
You gave me some. That's what I did.
It was on sorry. You can just ignore that. It was on an example that we sent over of what a typical SWOT analysis looks like. So there's really no distinction between those two.
On the traditional Johns Pass Village zoning, I understand you're going with the 55% land use that the Pinellas County, right, has set. Are you going to see buildings coming down to replace it with other things? I mean, it doesn't seem like somebody's going to want to use 55% of their land and build a 4-story building on 55%. Is that going to be a benefit to them, or is it just going to keep that traditional village the same?
So that's the current category, that retail and services category with the 0.55 FAR. That's the existing category. That's the problem, that one of the reasons why we have to fix this, because the retail and services it's a suburban commercial category for big box stores, fast food restaurants, like garden apartments, like things that obviously aren't in Johns Pass and we don't want down in Johns Pass. The category the county gave us after the alternative compromise was the neighborhood center, which is used mostly in smaller downtown areas and historic districts, like the Paso Grill area down in St. Pete Beach, the Palm Harbor Historic District, and up in
Yeah,
Tarpon
Gulfport.
Springs. And
Gulfport.
I think Gulfport actually has community
Oh,
center
okay,
technically,
okay.
but it's used in kind of those kinds of places. So so the floor area ratio in the village would be a 2 for commercial or mixed uses. In the activity centers, the FAR is treated as an all-inclusive for all the air-conditioned space. It doesn't matter what use it is. And it lines up with, because a lot of the buildings down there, because they cover most lots, the floor area ratios are above a 1.
Mhm. And the lots are quite small,
Yeah.
too.
So,
So the slide up there, I'm not sure if you can read it. These are the proposed standards. So the floor area ratio right now is a 0.55, so half of the lot, like 1 story, half of the lot. Obviously, that's not what's built down there. So the proposed is what Andrew just stated, that 2.0. And that allows for more flexibility. Yes.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello? Okay. First of all, I want to say I know you guys have done a lot of work because this has gone through many iterations trying to get it to this point. When I look at this, like if I look at the transitional area, you have a Florida area ratio of 1.5 with a 2.0 asterisk. Is the asterisk what they would be eligible for if they did a planned development? Is that what that represents?
No, not, thank you for asking that. So the asterisk, that is for a development agreement, and that's only using the alternative temporary lodging use standards. Something with the county's plan, that they allow for higher intensities and densities if you go through this development agreement process. And it's quite extensive. I don't have it in front of me exactly what's included. I think it's also in the special area plan is referenced, but it has, Andrew, you might,
yeah, I
Andrew
mean,
knows a little bit more about it.
the benefit of it makes sure the community has final say over the approval of a hotel, and that they have to meet certain, like, design standards, do certain
Mobility.
mitigations with transportation.
Traffic analysis,
So-
evacuation,
That's the table 5-1?
Yeah. 'Cause,
Is that what that is? Because I saw all that in table 5-1 from the countywide plan.
that sounds about right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
and
have
it
it in
has-
front of me, but
I'd have to look
that
at
sounds
it.
about right.
Yeah.
There's a whole section that discusses exactly what needs to be in the development agreement, and that's just the basics. So those things have to be in the development agreement. And then it goes to planning commission, it goes to BOC as well, where the city can ask whatever of the developer. And that's really where you can get unique designs, where the city can get a benefit out of going through this process, the developer going through this process of the development agreement. Trust me, developers do not want to go through the development agreement process. It's lengthy, it's costly, and then they're giving away things as well and having to provide things to the city. So it's an opportunity for the city to ask for things in return, things that are unique that you typically don't get.
Okay. When I look at this, and you said that Andrew had created this, I believe you alluded to this. When we look at your maps that are on this presentation, there's a lot of information there. Sometimes it's too much. It doesn't
Yeah.
narrow it down enough.
Yeah.
When I look at it, I don't see a map that clearly details where we're at right now, units per acre, or FAR. Compare that to where you want to go, and what's the delta. So if I look from one map to the next, I can say, well, this might be a change here, but there's nothing concretely showing me an image that says that, okay, well, there's currently 50 units per acre here, but reality, we have built 75. So we have a delta of 25, and that's what we got to
Yes.
fix.
So we had a slide in the other presentation. Since this is more focused towards zoning, we didn't include those slides. We thought it might be too much to include with the zoning, because the zoning, we're really focusing more on setbacks, height, things of that nature. But in the previous presentations to the BOC and public, we did have just the slide that I was on before had the current and then the proposed right next to each other, so you can see the difference.
I've looked at the stuff that was shared with the BOC in the past. I've actually downloaded everything from the meeting packets to look at it. It's there. If you're saying it's there, it's there.
Yeah.
Where? Is it that one right there that I'm looking
Yeah,
at?
I pulled it up. This is in the special area plan. This is on our website. And we have all the material, the activity server plan, the ordinances themselves. I linked to the Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners meeting because they'll have an agenda packet. So we did look at the previous master plan. We looked at what was currently built there. And as you can see, there are, especially in the resort, there are some larger condo buildings that are used more like nightly rentals now, but that reach 70 units per acre. In the transitional, some of the get closer to the 60 for the temporary lodging. I guess kind of a confusing is density and height can kind of vary because, like, for example, like something like Barefoot Beach Club is taller than the Cambria, but the Cambria has more units per acre, even though it's shorter. So, I mean, it's tough to kind of visualize height versus density. Or even like how the parking garage is one of the tallest buildings in that whole entire activity center, but they cover the outside of it so well, it's tough to tell how many, it's 6 floors, but it's tough to see that. So, but we did look at each individual district. We included pictures of buildings of what exists currently down there, and the neighborhood center category is the most restricted activity center category that the county provides, and it lines up with what's down there. With the sliding scale thing, you would need an acre to have that 100 units, but it's important to remember that the lots are very small down there, and FAR also will regulate the size of it. And with that development agreement, you have to actually count the parking garage towards the floor area. So that knocks off some of the density that they could actually get because they have to include that parking garage, which normally they don't. But the county, that's what I mean. This language makes it harder to build and gives the community more input to regulate future development. And I mean, that's kind of the concern from hearing from past experiences. Communities felt like they didn't or have that power to kind of regulate future development, and this fixes that and gives the community and the board the tools they need to handle future development down there.
And I think, like when Andrew's talking about like the units per acre and height, as an engineer trying to understand the planning as I've gone through this, let's say you have a property that can get 50 units per acre, but those units can be a suite with 2 rooms, so you get 4 people in there. But if you have 100 units per acre, those units get smaller, and you end up with just 2 people in each room, or 1 person in each room. So you can end up with 2 or 4. You end up with the same number of people. So sometimes the units per acre, I think, gets a little overwhelming, but that's kind of how I look at it, is if you get less units, they could be bigger and support more people or the same. So
Do they have, the countywide plan lists under the density intensity standards for each one of their categories, they list things like residential and vacational rental use, residential equivalent use, non-residential use, mixed use, put all these in here. It goes into the detail even showing that, say like if it's residential equivalent use, and I'm looking specifically residential medium, all right? And this is under the September 2023 countywide plan.
So the residential density is capped at what it currently is. We were not allowed to touch that at all because of related to, we want to make sure we don't negatively impact hurricane evacuations. Interestingly enough, that was, when we looked at the history of the previous master plan, one of the issues with the ordinances that were supposed to implement the master plan back in the day was related to the residential density, but we did not add any additional, and we actually removed it from certain areas because the boardwalk, the county's category right now has residential density over it, but we don't want that allowed because it's a flood-prone area and it's primarily commercial, so we've reduced this to just 0. So there are, but we didn't, the residential density we weren't able to touch, just based off of that, and the county has a policy, they don't add residential density in like coastal high hazard areas.
Okay, I appreciate this, because what you guys are telling me is good stuff.
Yeah.
To get back to what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, when we look at this, it shall not exceed the equivalent of 3 beds per permitted dwelling unit at the 15 unit per acre. So Cambria, smaller sizes, still conforms. They still should comply with that beds per dwelling, correct? So you're saying some may be 2, some may be more, whatever, per dwelling? They still have to comply with that, is that correct?
So the Cambria is a temporary lodging use. It's their hotel rooms. I think that residential equivalent use might be like either assisted livings or group homes. I'd have to
Yeah, I
check the
think
county's
so.
definition for it.
Okay.
But
Each of the, under the September 2023, because I looked at the 2017 and it's totally different. Holy cow. But the 2023, each one of the categories has that, a maximum number of beds per dwelling. So it's there. But I don't know how it fits into this. And honestly, that's probably a deeper
And that's
conversation.
a residential equivalency?
I'd
that
have to
right?
go back and look
Okay.
Under that, because I'm
And we can
looking
talk
at it just
after.
briefly. It's
Yeah, that's fine.
153 pages. And I can tell you the
Yes,
one I'm
good
looking at is
Lord.
page 21 for that specific category.
I'd
That's, when I look at this also, if I look through it, the alternative plan is things like creating this neighborhood center, which we know we need. Because if something happens in that community area, they can't rebuild, and that's not right. Because a lot of these businesses and residences have been there prior to the current
Yeah,
codes, and they need to
absolutely.
have that standard so that they can rebuild. To get back even to the first one that I started with, this is good because it actually tells us what's our FAR based on those areas. What it doesn't tell me is what doesn't meet the current code. And it's there, it's in it, but I have to go back, not being an engineer for your respect and not having all the access to ArcGIS, which I can do some of it, but I don't have all the data. If I just had a picture to show me, FAR is not compliant here. That's what I need to see, because then you get a real idea. Or UPA is not compliant here. And then it really points out to the community, these are the reasons we have to fix this. And that's, even though you've got so much data in here, and it's a lot, it's not clear. And I think that would help a lot of people understand the real reason. And I'm honestly having to dig with my own electrical engineering mind and come up, okay, I get it, but I don't see it. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying? It's not clear with what you've got, but I do believe it's needed.
yeah, it does. I mean, one thing we could do in the next time we do a presentation, we could focus on a couple specific examples to explain that this building is legally non-conforming for reasons X, Y, and Z, and how this category would bring that building into compliance. We can definitely, especially when it comes back for second reading, include that, because it would be good to explain that.
We have a workshop before that
Oh,
too.
we do have a
VOCO workshop,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, then
So we
maybe,
can definitely do that.
yeah,
We do appreciate the input because sometimes it's hard for us
yeah.
to go back and, exactly. We've been in it for so long that sometimes it's hard.
I don't want to downplay that. You've done a lot of work, and it's really good stuff. Sorry.
There's just a lot of maps, a lot of data, so I completely understand. But we appreciate that input. We'll definitely look at that and include that in our next presentations.
Sorry for that. I'm so used to using teacher voice, I don't think about the mics. So and honestly, kudos to you guys, because I've gone through these and looked at these, and there's been so many discussions, and you really have given good stuff. And let me let somebody else ask questions because I have more.
So the word on the street of Madeira Beach is that this whole thing is designed to bring in bigger hotels, bigger commercial areas, and so on. And from what I'm seeing here, we're trying to really just control that area, and you're basically the commercial area, traditional area, is most likely going to stay the way it
Yes.
is now?
Yeah, we're-
Yes, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. I know that's word on the street.
Exactly,
But
and
the
that's why
activity centers
that's why
really-
people are scared is because
Yeah. And
they're
I
thinking of
understand
more
that.
traffic, more people, and you're actually trying to control some of that area along the beach or on the west side of Gulf Boulevard, and people aren't going to be businesses aren't going to be coming down along that traditional area because they're not going to be able to make use out of that land the way it is now.
What we're really trying to do with the activity center is protect what's there, and then making sure that any new development will match or meet those standards, that will look the same and the same character. Obviously, you don't want, here, let me go back to the presentation. We don't want something, and Johns Pass Village has this very quaint fishing village, Main Street character. You don't want a new building to look like this, one story, all these setbacks. And that's all that we can build right now. So that's really what this whole process is, to protect what's down there, make sure that anything new will meet that character.
And what about the back street area that's kind of not
On
developed?
Pelican. Yeah, so in the land development regulations, there's some things that we can write in there to protect and redesign that back area, but it's not going to be something overnight. But we definitely know that there needs to be a lot of help in that on Pelican Lane.
And I think it's important to remember that this category is much more restrictive than the categories that like places like Clearwater Beach or St. Pete Beach or even Treasure Island or even Madeira. This category is more restrictive than Madeira Beach Town Center's category. That's what I mean. Like you can't even get to the density that Town Center has with this. It's more restrictive than that. So I think there's a lot of rumors about that, but in reality, you can't reach that kind of density. I mean, there's some buildings that are like tripled height of like the tallest buildings down there are really like Barefoot Beach Club, Madeira Bay, and Madeira Norte and the parking garage. And there's buildings in other places that are like triple the height of that. And we don't want those kinds of, we don't want anything bigger than what currently exists down there. So this category basically makes sure that new stuff looks like what currently exists there.
You mentioned that there's very few plats or properties that are an acre, because we were talking about units per acre. Can you give us an idea of how many properties in this designation are an acre? Even 1 acre?
I mean, the challenge with that is people could buy property and do unity of titles. It's important to remember, though, that we're reducing the density along Village and in the Triangle from 60 to 45. We're taking away any density off the boardwalk. So, I mean, there's really only so much. We have, in the special area plan, we have average lot size. That might be good to pull up as
I
an
think it's
example.
hard to show what lots are. I don't think there's any like open lots that are unified that are an acre. Obviously, some people own multiple lots and you could unify them together and it could be an acre or a little
like-
over an acre. But what Andrew has right now is the average lot size of each character district. So most of the lot sizes are quite small. So then you multiply that with the units per acre, and it's not as large as, sometimes it's hard, you see, 60 units per acre. Oh, that's going to be a lot. But then you think, okay, well, what the lot's like the average lot is like 0.25 of an acre. So doesn't come out to as many as you typically think.
Yeah, and I actually, in the special area plan, I do have where there is vacant land listed, and as you can see, it's mostly built out, and even the stuff that's vacant used to have buildings on it. So I mean, it's areas that have already been impacted by development over the years, and there's just really not much place where you could like unify enough land to get like acre is about the largest you could really unify down there. You can't really unify more than that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If you look at this, you've got the vacant residential, which is like that flesh color, and then the vacant commercial, which is the light pink. So to give you an idea, kind of right in here, and then these little areas. Yeah, nice map, Andrew.
And remember, like with the development agreement, they have to include the parking garage in that floor area, and it's going to be restricted by whatever like regulations we put in the land. So I mean, if they can't, they might not even be able to get to that 100 units based on those limitations. And even then, the board has the final say. So if you think 100 was too much for that property, and you could say you want 80, you can tell them that, and they have to do that, because the community has the final say over what goes there.
There was a statement made earlier where some of the community, all right, is concerned that this is going to be used to increase the amount of commercial, whatever, district, buildings, hotels, who cares? But it's going to increase what we already have. That really starts to get to the direction where you need to see what's going on, because you actually have that broken down very well. This is the current uses, and this is where we're at. The density intensity requires that you look at FAR and UPA both. You got to look at both. Mm-hmm. You've got the FAR map. You've got that, and it actually almost correlates to this. If you look at it carefully, you can see that it's there. What it's not telling us is where they're at currently and what the proposed changes, how they change it. That delta is what we don't see. And then another aspect of that is what's not conforming. Legally non-conforming or non-conforming, and if something happens, they can't rebuild. Yeah. It just doesn't tell us that story. Yeah. You have all the data. It's not pulled together concisely. It's good data. It's just, it doesn't make it clear to where everybody can look at it and say, oh, that's what's going on. And it gets rid of that, hey, we're going to rebuild, knock everything down, make it bigger and better. It's really just want to be able to do what you've got.
I think the challenge is it's tough to predict what could be built. As of right now, by right or with a development agreement, you could build temporary lodging uses basically down in most of those areas already currently. And basically in all the districts but the boardwalk, there are temporary lodging style uses. I think it's challenge the show what potentially could be built there. It's kind of hard to show that. But I mean, we have all the information of what currently exists, which we're happy to include more of that in the Board of Commissioners workshop presentation. I mean, I guess, and then even with the county, what they look at is their categories. They have a more general trip generation rate that kind of encompasses both existing and potential development. So, and that's kind of what they look at, but unfortunately, unless if it's like a specific development being proposed and there's nothing attached to this is the city fixing and making stuff conforming down there. It's not tied to anything specific. It's kind of hard because when you have a specific development, they had a development agreement, they have to show the impact of that development. Like they have to do like the traffic study. But since there's no development tied to this, it's kind of tough to show that.
I don't think anybody's asking to postulate on what's going to change.
Yeah.
Because if something happened and that was to blow down and somebody changed their mind, it's commercial, they can change their mind and build what they want as long as it meets code. That doesn't matter. It's their property. They have those rights to make those choices. Literally, what's going to change with UPA? What's going to change with FAR? And what's legally non-conforming or non-conforming right now? That's, that. I mean, if you could show that, it shows how you're going to protect the current characteristic. And it makes it clear that if you want it to be like it is, this is what you got to fix. Right now, it's so much, you can't see that. What's going to change with UPA? What's going to change with FAR? And what is legally conforming or legally non-conform, or what do you call it? I'm sorry, non-conforming or legally non-conforming. That it tells you exactly where the problems are at if you look at that.
And it's important to remember the board, at the second reading for this, when it comes back in March, they have the power to reduce that alternative temporary lodging use standard. And previous we have reduced it based off of motions. We've reduced the by right temporary lodging in the commercial core area based off of a motion of the board. So I mean, the thing is, if the board's more comfortable with it at a different, like the sliding scale would still be there, but like a different max, then that is fine. And remember, it's still more restrictive than the county's maximums. What exists in town center, because this category is a much more restrictive category than the category for town center, but they do have the power to decide that at the second reading.
Sorry, I'm looking at slide 12.
Let me go.
Sorry, 11, slide 11. And in the orange, the property that's divided by something alley, Fisherman's Alley, right? If one person were to buy all that, could they combine each side of Fisherman's Alley?
I think, so Fisherman's Alley is a city, so the city will not vacate that. But I think if you combine that entire thing, I think that's just at an acre or right about an acre. But you would have to combine all those
Would that work
lots.
for them? Like, if I wanted to build a hotel and I wanted to achieve that maximum, 100 alternative of 100, could I combine both of those together, even if it's the same hotel built on both sides of Fisherman's
Yes.
Alley? Could I?
Yes.
Could I?
The countywide
negotiate
plan
for
allows that,
that,
and our plan allows that
But
as
that's
well.
not by right, right? That would be, or would it
You can do that, yes,
currently?
yes, by right. You
Currently
can
they could do that.
combine this, yes.
But they'd have to have a road running between.
Yeah, they can't take our right of way. That is our right of way, and they can't get
They
any
can't just
density
build
off of
over
that right of way
the right
either.
of way
Can they,
or,
can they build a bridge across to connect the two buildings?
I mean, previously there has been built, like the parking garage does have a connecting bridge over Boardwalk Place. I mean, it would really, especially if they were doing the development, I mean, the community would have final say over what that bridge would look like. I mean, I think it'd be important to make sure that alley stays like a nice, small alley and has like kind of, but that's what I think the problem is under different city manager, different staff, there have been previous developments proposed down there, and I think people are worried about, but our plan is set up to, like, what was shown wouldn't be possible to build straight over it, like that we're making sure the plan's set up to not, but I mean, if someone tied it and they built two separate buildings on those, and these are very narrow parcels, and then you're still restricted by the height, you still got to meet the parking requirements, you still got to do the ground floor retail, so I mean, there's so many limitations, like, that regulate that density.
it definitely would
To
not be easy.
clarify,
Yeah.
to clarify, it's 60 UPA per acre, and that's what's by right. I think it was confusing with your answer as by right because you
Oh,
weren't sure what you were discussing. It's not 100 by right.
No, it's not
60 by
100.
right for the entire parcel. And I've had the conversation about Fisherman's Alley with the city manager, and that property right is all the way to the sky. So a bridge across city property would not be allowed unless the board wanted to change that, or that would be the same as selling Fisherman's Alley, which I don't think any of the current board anyway,
No.
would be open to. So I think this is spurring more fears, I think, than is justifiable at this time.
And the LDRs, you guys will have height limits anyways, so I mean, there's only,
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree, but that's,
yeah,
just wanted to clarify.
yeah.
Thank you.
And
Andrew, I'm wondering in your presentation, right now you have vacant lots there. We know that there is a developer ready to build a hotel in there. I think what everybody is not seeing, including me, is what the final look is going to be. In other words, if you could put in all the vacant lots a building that meets all of our regulations that you're putting forth, so that we have some kind of visual look, knowing that, of course, it's a proposal. It's not a finished product. Because a lot of people, back in 2018, there was supposed to be a 7-story hotel built there, and then they backed out, but they have not backed. They still own the land,
Go down to Johnson.
and they still want to go forward with a hotel. But
So-
visually, I can't, in my mind, see where this could go there and what that is going to do to the look of John's Pass.
I think it's important to remember what currently exists in the commercial core district, which is the Johns Pass Plaza parking garage and this mixed-use commercial structure that's multi-story. These lots, this one, let me go back to the, sorry. It's important to remember that this lot here is similar in size to these lots along Fisherman's Alley. And it has actually an alley behind it too, which I can show you. I think actually it's, oh yeah, it's Fisherman, yeah. Yeah, so for example, this is one of the newer structures down there that was built in the last 20 years. It has retail at grade that's flood proofed. It has the parking behind it, and it has temporary lodging use, well, restaurant there, and then some temporary lodging units above it. So I mean, this is, with the land development regulations that we're interested in, that getting feedback from today, like we would want newer stuff to look like this is what currently exists down
Yeah,
there.
similar to this, and
Yeah.
similar to this.
Yeah, because we want to make it look, I think the problem with the previous one, it was this big building that covered the alley. It didn't look like anything in John's Pass. We don't want it to not look like John's Pass down there. And we want to make sure any developer knows that we will not support something that doesn't look like John's Pass.
And then also putting in the zoning regulations, like light design guidelines, so the buildings can retain that character. So even though this is a newer building, it tried to maintain that fishing village, Main Street kind of character, instead of just being a box. So that's something else that we're really looking at.
Yeah, and what's
implementing
interesting
down
is
here.
there's 6 floors of parking behind that, the frontage of that building. And I don't think people realize how tall the parking garage is actually. It's actually very tall. It's as tall as the sixth floor condo building across the street from it, basically. But it doesn't look like that because of all the kind of design stuff it has on the street sides of it. But this is, we want stuff that looks nice and traditional village and like that, and that's not like a massive like Clearwater Beach-esque hotel or whatever concerns people have. Like, and that's why we're doing this, to make sure that doesn't happen.
So I think that the way that I would say it is simply, when the town center was created, the focus fell away from the visual of what was going to be built. And people got so focused on height nobody cared about what the buildings looked like. Although height does matter, with this, we're going to have a greater focus on what the buildings look like in addition to the height. And that is what everybody wants. The hotel theory that's going around, that's not going to happen with this plan.
Yeah, and it's important to, exactly, and it's important to remember, there aren't proposals tied to this, and whatever happened in the past.
This isn't designed for a developer. This is designed to really protect that area. It's for the community. And I know that word on the street is probably different, but that really is the intent in the background of this area, is that we realize, oh, we are not consistent with the county. Even our current land development regulations and comprehensive plan does not support this. So we need to change. We need to change something. And so the activity center really does all of that together. It's not for a developer. It's for the
It was
community.
mentioned that in 2018 that there was a article with a hotel drawing and
Yeah.
all.
Yes.
But that the owner was the current owner. I don't think it is the current owner. I think that that property was sold to someone else.
I think so.
And so any thought of that being built isn't reality. I don't think so.
No, and when I first started with the city, I think that was already at BOC. It was like one of the last meetings, so I wasn't really involved in that back in the day. But I do vaguely remember it, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but I don't think anything of that could be built with the standards that are in place right now. Okay, any questions? Otherwise, get up and we'll be walking around. There's stations. Please feel free to ride away. SWOT analysis, and then there's also papers in the back. If you could fill those out, turn those in, or you can always turn those in later. Oh, another question?
Yeah, this may have been asked before, but I didn't hear it in this meeting. I understand what the purpose is of the alternative temporary lodging use, the alternate plans that can be used.
Yes.
But is it mandatory that the municipality uses those?
No, it's not mandatory that we use those. It's an option that the county allows for us to use. So we use it up and down Gulf Boulevard. It's an option up and down Gulf Boulevard and C3, C4,
Yeah, we
C4
have
and
that in our
R3.
comp plan and
So we
zoning
have that in our
currently.
comp plan and zoning right now. So it's also, we are proposing to also include it in the Johns Pass Village Activity Center area.
So based on what you showed, I think in slide 2, it looked like a Maslow's pyramid where you talk about the countywide plan being the least restrictive, all the way down to the municipality being the most restrictive.
Yeah, and how they all have to be the
If
same.
it comes back and you show your FAR and your UPA where you need to change it to, but it's less than what you're requesting right now, does the Board of Commissioners have the opportunity to lower that to where it meets where we're currently at?
They can change that next, the March meeting.
Do they have that information available to them to show them this is where we're at, but this is what we're proposing? Like I was asking, what's the
Oh, like
delta
the
that we're
current- the
between where we're
current
at and where we
densities.
need to be?
Exactly.
Let me just pull up the special area plan, because we might have.
I haven't seen it concretely the way I'm asking.
I-
Where are we right now? And what's the difference to get us to where we have to be? So in other words, if we need 50 units per acre in a certain spot plus a floor area ratio of 2.0, but yet we're at 40 units per acre, and our floor to area ratio is 1.2, what do you have to
Of what's
change to make that
currently
happen?
built?
What do you need based on what's currently built?
I think one option, so the board has the option to, and we brought this up at the previous workshops, that they could reduce the alternative temporary lodging standards to a lower number. It's important to remember that it's a sliding scale, but they could reduce it to that 75 and just have that be the max, and that would cover basically everything. One thing that would be important to include, though, is still probably keeping the 3 FAR, because you got to include that parking garage, and parking has been a big concern for the community, so we want to make sure that whatever, they put as much parking as they can to, because the community's really been kind of like wanting to make sure that anything new has enough parking.
So have you shown them concretely, this is where we're at, this is where we've got to be? Because in order to rebuild, there's things that we know that currently are not compliant. But does the Board of Commissioners have that concrete data to say that this is the delta that we have to get where we need to be? Because what you're saying is, 75 to 100 if they do a planned development or whatever that's called, 60 is going to be a standard, all right? So 60 you have to let them do by right. But to go up above it, what's the maximum they need? You're given a range. You're not being specific about what is it they got to get to. Do they need 75? Do they need 70? We don't know that.
Yeah, I think the highest, let me just go to that slide again. Yeah, I think the highest down there was in John's Pass Resort was about a 70.
But you're saying it could go to 75 to 100, but to get where we need to be, it needs to be 70 for a rebuild. Is that what I'm hearing? Because what I'm hearing, honestly, is you're saying that, okay, if they go through the planned process, they could go up to 100, all right? But yet what they really need is to be able to go up to 70.
Like what's on the,
Yeah.
you're saying like what's on the ground?
What's currently
the
there? Because
ground.
that's our
And that's what-
objective as citizens is to make sure that
Yes.
they can rebuild
So
and
Andrew has
rebuild
that.
fairly.
Yeah.
And I wrote down some additional maps that maybe Andrew can create for the next BOC workshop.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about
To
that,
kind of
Andrew.
show
No, it's all good. It's important.
the
to show this
density and the FAR, showing like what's non-conforming, kind of like a heat map, similar to that slide right there.
Yeah.
But I think that has your range of what's there right now
Yeah.
on that slide.
But will it tell us that this is really what they have to rebuild?
So-
Not the proposal, we want to go up to 100 because that's what the countywide allows us to do. What do they need?
With that development agreement process. What were you saying?
Just for my clarification with your question, when you're saying what do they need, are you saying what do the owners of the property need to have such that they can rebuild what they already have?
Yes.
Or, okay, so you're talking about an existing property, what does that existing property need versus an undeveloped piece of property?
Conforming.
Yes.
Correct, okay.
Because that's what we're really talking about, is those people that have those properties that are existing, they're either legally conforming or non-conforming, and we want to make sure that they can build back to that characteristic where it's at.
Right.
But I haven't seen anything that said, this is where we are, specifically, and this is where we're not compliant.
Yeah. I
I think
mean,
it's on that slide that
But it's not,
Andrew
it
has
doesn't
right now.
break it down. If I look at more than one slide, I can get an idea. I don't have one slide that shows me that data, because that data would tell the entire community, this is where the problem is.
So on this page right now, this heat map that Andrew created
I should probably do a
right
density.
here, I put a note on my notes to have one of these for the density as well. So
Okay.
would that show
Yep, based
better
on what
of
I'm
what-
seeing there, it
what you
says
have?
residential density UPA is 70, but yet you're asking for 75 to 100. The FAR,
But
there
having like
shows
a map like
1.6
this.
is the highest, but I'm not certain what the highest FAR is allowed underneath the current proposal. I don't know if it's 2 or 2.2, but Andrew, you're saying for parking, you got to have 3. That's important to know.
yeah.
You know, that's important to know.
There's so
There's
many
nothing
little
that pulls it together.
things.
You got to look at multiple maps.
I think it's kind of a challenge is since there's no development tied to it, there's so many different scenarios. Like, there's a difference between if someone came in proposing a mixed-use building with retail on the ground and residential condo units above it versus someone coming in and applying for a development agreement to do a hotel or some temporary lodging thing with, because we look at the FAR in different ways, like with the condo units and the commercial, it'd be an all-inclusive FAR, and we'd just look at air-conditioned space. But if it's that hotel with that development agreement, we'd be looking at the parking garage also. I mean, I think the thing is important to, the board can reduce that max if they want it to be 75, which would encompass everything down within that 20-something acres. That'd be fair, and they could vote to put that in a motion. It wouldn't, the lock it at everything that currently exists doesn't really give much, like, I mean, we wanted to keep it restricted where there wasn't really much flexibility.
But then with that development agreement, that alternative temporary lodging new standards, you look at the countywide rules and look at what's included in the development agreement, that's just a baseline. You have to have those things. And then the community gets to have more input, BOC gets to have more input. You get to be unique. You need to say, hey, I want the design to look like this. You get to be very specific to those developments. So you want to have some incentives to allow a developer to
Well,
do that, so you get a bit of return.
Just being straightforward, we have new businesses that have been built in those areas, new hotels, new condos, stuff like that. And I'm fairly confident that they're comfortably thriving. So do you really need to let them go up to 100 if they're already at 70? That's, and that's something for the board and for the
Yeah.
planning commission to make a decision on.
Exactly.
But what do they need? You're proposing, let's go up to 100. That's okay. What do they need to rebuild right now? It's not concretely on a map.
I know it's, if you have the existing property, I know when Andrew did his analysis, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that was taken into consideration, like what is already there. We didn't want to make anything non-conforming with the changes that were made. So comfortable in the analysis that these changes protect the existing properties that are there to be rebuilt. I don't know how we answer the question for undeveloped pieces of parcel. So,
And what's
yeah.
the
I'm not,
potential
me
impact?
personally, I'm not looking for anything undeveloped, anything proposed in the
Exactly.
future.
So our-
That's just, what do we need right now?
And that's what we're proposing. I believe
I
that
mean,
to
the
answer it, that's what we're
75 would
proposing,
encompass
right?
everything down there.
Would 100?
I mean, everything
Minimum.
down there, like
What's-
a
So is
75,
75 the minimum? That's what I'm asking. Would that
75
allow
would
them
be
to
the
rebuild?
minimum to encompass everything down there.
Okay. And if they had a future plan, they could build similar to what's right now if they had 75, correct?
Yeah, if 75 was the maximum with a development agreement, it would encompass everything. It's important, though, to make sure that incentivize applying, because it is costly and time-consuming to apply for that development agreement. So I mean, it was kind of a balance of offering some incentive, but not too much, because we don't want large hotel resort style. We don't want that down there, and that.
So you're saying off the bay, they built a new condo there, and then Barefoot Beach built theirs. They should be at the 70 or below, if that's the case, for the UPA, right? They should be, based on what I'm seeing. They had to go through that process in one way or another, but yet they're still affordable, and they're making a profit based on that. So is it necessary, is it truly necessary to go above the 70, 75? I mean, it may be. I don't know the answer to that. But right now, if those people are making a profit and they're at 70, do we need to go a lot higher than that? Because going from 70 to 100, if you look at it, it's an increase of 30 over 70. So that's quite a high percentage.
I think it's also important to, we did look at like average density for building potential, just as a hypothetical scenario, just to see what would be so by right, we're actually reducing the by right from what was in our comp plan from 51 to 50 if it averaged over each character district. With the alternative temporary lodge use standards, the max average would be in this, but these are like hypothetical scenarios because as you can see, it's mostly built out. So, I mean, we did look at kind of what the development potential was. But as you see by right, we actually are reducing it because we did remove density from certain areas. So, and then this, they actually get, which since the area is fully built out, like it's not, this is like, these are basically hypothetical max that aren't really possible to reach because it already is mostly built out.
So even more clearly, if you were to reduce the FAR to what currently is for the largest building you have, whatever that largest one is to make it conforming, and reduce UPA to whatever the largest UPA is you have for that area, all right? Does it harm any businesses? Would it harm them? Or
I
does it
mean,
allow them an opportunity if they were catastrophically destroyed in some way or another, that they could actually rebuild and potentially even rebuild more if they're not at that current standard?
If I might, I would think that these are the type questions that would come in front of the board when they're getting ready to do their second.
But they're supposed to answer them here. This is.
No, I know, but they've been asked already, and they're going to bring to the next board meeting
Yeah.
what's existing around and the UPA in each of those, so we get a actual visual, just like you're asking. So we have a visual at the presentation on what's there. And those would, I'm just interjecting because we're going round and round and round on the same.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's good you brought this up, and we're happy to make this in an organized way in a presentation, because I think it's good to have the visuals, because you're right, we look at this every day, so we're imagining in our head, but the people,
they're-
residents can't imagine that.
But they're here to present what's being, what's,
Yeah.
And what I'm
what's
asking is-
here.
What
But
I'm asking for is a clarification, because I agree, I know it's got to happen. I agree with it.
right.
But if you're looking at the larger community, I'm sorry, if you're looking at the larger community, the couple of things I've asked, what's the delta on FAR? What's the delta UPA? What's legally conforming, non-conforming? And then if you take it and you look at it, where are we currently at? It's in here, guys. I know it's in here. But even me looking through the pages of what I've looked through, it's not clear this is where we really are for this area. And if you want to rebuild, does the Board of Commissioners and those groups that'll be there, are they able to see it at that point that we really have to have a minimum of 70 UPA and an FAR of 2.2? That's a minimum. But where you're saying parking, which I've not heard until just now, and I agree with you if you're saying it, I believe you.
Yeah.
We need an FAR of 3.
Yeah.
That needs to be clarified because it's not there.
Yeah.
Not concretely. It's there, just not concrete, okay?
Yeah, if you look at the countywide plan and the alternative temporary lodging use standards, look through that, and then it talks about the garage and having to count that as the FAR, which is unusual. It's very bizarre. We brought that up before, but
Yeah,
you will,
Yeah.
the garage is important.
yes.
Yeah,
It's
and
important.
It's important to remember that newer buildings require more parking than older ones. So some of these buildings that are legally non-conforming might not, if they had to be rebuilt, they would need more parking than what they currently have. Because as with like condo units, residential, don't we require 2 per unit? And then with
Yes.
temporary lodging.
Our parking standards are different than what
Yeah.
they used to be.
And-
And a lot of them were built before our
Yeah.
code, so,
Yeah, and we've added additional, like with the ancillary uses with hotels, you need like parking for those ancillary, like
Yes.
50% of what's, if it was a standalone, but you still need
It's still
those parking.
parking.
So,
whereas before, I know that they didn't.
yeah. Yeah.
I just
Okay.
have a quick question.
That's fair.
Yes.
On your handout, proposed setbacks they're all blank. Didn't we have proposed setbacks?
No, so this is, we're wanting to get that information on what you think should be the proposed setbacks for each district, and it has the existing setbacks for each zoning district.
Are you
It
having a
has the- it
flashback
has-
to accessory structures?
It, no, it has the current required setbacks, but doesn't have existing.
That's the existing setbacks. So at the very top of that
No,
page.
that's current setbacks, 10 foot on one side, and we know, oh, wait a minute, let me see. Yeah, these all have side setbacks, and we know what's there now doesn't have side setbacks.
That's what's per code.
That's
that's-
my point.
Right.
And it's kind of goes into what Jerry was getting at. You're asking for input, but you're not showing what's there now.
Versus what's, yeah, by code. Gotcha.
See,
Yep, I'm with you.
Yeah, the setbacks, unless we have the site plan for them.
because you're asking for people's input. You really want what's there now. So they would probably agree with what's non-conforming right now, I would say.
Yeah.
Yep. And you keep asking, like, what they need. I think one thing to remember, too, is the cost of construction obviously is astronomical. The cost to become floodplain compliant and elevate is expensive, requires deep foundations. So let's say right now you are running a hotel, you're doing really well with 30 units. You lose those 30 units. They crunch the numbers and go, gosh, with the cost to rebuild and everything like that, we really need 10 or 15 more units to still charge what we were charging and only to continue to make what we were making and cover our costs for construction. So there's some things we have to look at too. There's some moving factors here. So at a bare minimum, we want them to get back what they had, but then they do have to run the numbers and see what's worth rebuilding and how they do
the
that.
property as well. So
Yeah,
if you are
all the
if
whole
you're
thing.
buying and then wanting to build, that's an extra cost as well.
Yep.
That does, you want to make sure that they can rebuild and fairly be able to make the profit they're currently making.
Yeah.
But does that mean they need to go from 70 to 100 to do that?
Exactly.
I doubt that's the case. Maybe 70 to 85. I mean, that could be a real number, but
Right.
that's honestly going from 70 to 100. You take 30 out of 70, that's close to 50% increase. Close, because 35 would be a 50% increase. So it's,
And then that sliding
there's no
scale
way
is
they need to
also-
increase by 50%.
That sliding scale is also based on land area.
Yeah.
So
But
a
the
lot
Board
of
of
people can't
Commissioners
even
can
get
make it
to-
lower
Yeah,
based upon what
That
they
is
want.
second
definitely
reading,
can
they
on
can
second reading.
reduce it, and it's important to remember that, because that's just one little component of this plan. So, I mean, it wouldn't be worth losing everything over, is 100, like 100 versus 75, like, we're
Or
definitely.
100 versus 80.
Yeah, like,
or-
so.
But
Or
Andrew,
85.
to address one of the things I know that's going in the community, if you give them this information and you tell them, look, we don't build back to this point, which I believe people will believe you because I know you're working hard at it. It makes it easier for people to swallow that, yeah, this has got to happen. Because right now, even though the data's there, and I'm an engineer, I'm looking at it, it's confusing, but I get in my head that I see this needs to happen. But I'm being honest, it's not concrete. That's the problem. It's not concrete. Give us that picture. It'll make it concrete.
Yeah, and I think it's important, I agree, and I think the next BOC workshop will have to include that information to clarify things. I think it's important with the land development regulation side things, though, and it's tough to visualize this, and that's why we include pictures of what currently exists, is like height, and height's almost kind of nebulous in a way, because the thing is, like you could have a building that feels more imposing because it takes up more of the lot, but it might only be 2 or 3 stories, and you could have a building that's taller, 6 or 7 stories, but it has a lot of setback, and it doesn't feel, or the upper floors are set back more. One of the things that I'd like to include, or an option to bring up with the land development regulations, is to require the upper floors to be set back a certain amount of feet. Because I think that would, because people don't like a building that's just a square block that's like straight up. And from hearing from residents, that's kind of the concern is, like, and this was an issue with Town Center, is the PD process allowed, when you rezone to a PD, you were allowed to adjust the setbacks and height based off of other similar developments. And because of that, the developer kind of just, that's what he proposed, and the community didn't really have as much input to what, and the thing is, if people want the upper floors to be further set back, we want to hear from you guys and put that in the land development regulations when we do the zoning ordinance eventually. for this. But those are kind of some ideas that like relate to kind of how to make height, like regulate height and make it less imposing, for example.
Andrew, I think you got good ideas, man. It really is good stuff. And I don't, even though I'm asking stuff, please understand, I know you put a lot of work in this, and I know you've tried to pull this together, and what is there is good. It's just in my head, I'm like, okay, I don't see this. That's all it is. You know, and but it's there if I try to differentiate it. You know?
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of things in this, so
Yeah.
we made notes of things to include in the next. So hopefully that'll help.
And kudos to you guys. I would not want to be in your position. Because I follow this. It's been rough.
Oh. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So if everybody wants to get up and mark
Right.
away, yay. Thank you. Thank you
you.
for everybody for attending too.